And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. The Los Angeles Times has published 2 photographs that show U.S. soldiers posing with the corpses and body parts of dead Afghans. In one of the photos, a U.S. soldier from the Army's 82nd Airborne Division in 2010 poses with a dead Afghan man's hand on his shoulder. The newspaper says he was an insurgent. In another, soldiers hold upside down mangled corpses of what the L.A. Times identifies as a suicide bomber. They are among 18 photographs given to the L.A. Times by a soldier who said they reveal a breakdown in leadership and discipline that he believes compromised troop safety. The paper's editor, Devan Maharaj, said he decided that, quote, publishing a small but representative selection of the photos would fulfill our obligation to readers to report vigorously and impartially on all aspects of the American mission in Afghanistan. He noted the newspaper published the least gruesome of the photos and had no plans to publish the others. The images are the latest in a growing list of abuses attributed to the U.S. military in Afghanistan, including the massacre of 17 Afghan civilians, the Koran burning episode, and troops urinating on Afghan corpses. On Wednesday, President Barack Obama called for those responsible to be held accountable. White House spokesman Jay Carney told reporters, quote, the conduct depicted in those photos is reprehensible. U.S. Defense Secretary Leon Panetta also condemned the photos.
This is not who we are, and it's certainly not who we represent when it comes to the great majority of men and women in uniform who are serving there. I expect that the matter will be fully investigated. That investigation has already begun.
After the L.A. Times decided to publish the photos, it waited more than 72 hours so the Pentagon could take extra security precautions in Afghanistan. Panetta said the images might trigger retaliatory violence against foreign soldiers stationed there.
This is war, and I know that war is ugly and it's violent. And I know that young people, sometimes caught up in the moment, make some very foolish decisions. I am not excusing that. I'm not excusing that behavior. But neither do I want these images to bring further injury to our people or to our relationship with the Afghan people. We had urged the LA Times not to run those photos. And the reason for that is those kinds of photos are used by the enemy to incite violence. And lives have been lost as a result of the publication of similar photos in the past, so we regret that they were published.
Defense Secretary Panetta was speaking at a meeting of NATO ministers in Brussels Wednesday. Several NATO allies promised to underwrite Afghanistan's armed forces after foreign troops depart. The United States and other nations plan to retreat from Afghanistan by the end of 2014 and hand the security issue over to Afghan security forces. The NATO talks come just days after one of the most serious attacks on Kabul since the Taliban government was ousted from power in 2001. On Sunday, Afghan militants waged an 18-hour assault on the Afghan capital and 3 other provinces in what the Taliban called the start of a major spring offensive. The Afghan Defense Ministry said 32 insurgents were killed in the attacks, which targeted the Afghan parliament, the German and British embassies, a supermarket, and a hotel. Afghan President Hamid Karzai said the Taliban offensive showed a failure by the intelligence services and especially by NATO. Well, for more, we're going to go directly to Kabul, Afghanistan, where we're joined by a peace activist who's going by the name Hakim. He's coordinator for Afghan Youth Peace Volunteers. And here in New York, we're joined by Gopal, journalist who covers Afghanistan, Egypt, Syria, and other countries in the region, currently working on a book about the history of the decade-long Afghan war. He also has just returned from Syria. But I want to go directly to Kabul now, to Hakim. Can you talk about the release of these photos, or what these photos depict from a 2010 deployment of U.S. military, soldiers standing with the body parts or the mangled corpses posing with them for these photos, Hakim? Have they been showing in Afghanistan?
Yes, certainly President Karzai himself has called the photos in humane and provocative. and Afghans who have access to online facilities are becoming familiar with the photos now. And as suspected in the previous videos of U.S. soldiers urinating on corpses and the kill team keeping fingers as trophies, all this seems to be old news, creating quite a bit of anger and cynicism.
And Hakim, the recent coordinated attacks by the Taliban, the impact on the general population, especially with the U.S. government continually claiming that the Taliban insurgency has receded in terms of its strength.
Well, I think that the reports from the UN in 2011 about the increase in violence, as well as other reports, counter the narrative that the U.S. NATO coalition gives about decreasing violence or decreasing Taliban insurgency. I think that the Kabul attacks should point us to think seriously and re-examine the whole war against terrorism in Afghanistan.
And what happened on this weekend, the coordinated attack overall, what it means. Also the news right afterwards that Australia will be pulling its troops out early from Afghanistan.
Yes, it is interesting to note that the U.S. Ambassador Ryan Cocker, who, by the way, also presided over the disastrous Iraq war, has responded to the Kabul attacks by justifying the fact that an early U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan may provoke further 9/11. We have to disagree with Ambassador Ryan Cocker. The fact that all the terrorist-like incidents in the past few weeks, including the Kabul attacks and the Sergeant Bale in response to the Quran burning and Sergeant Bale's killing spree in Kandahar, shows that if we don't address the agreements that the U.S. and Australian governments and other governments are making for a long-term war strategy in Afghanistan, we are heading for an increase in violence in this part of the world, in South Asia, perhaps perpetual war, more serious than the Kabul attacks.
And Hakim, the efforts of President Karzai to continue to distance himself publicly from the very American military that arranged to have him essentially installed in power. He continues to call the Taliban my brothers and seek to promote peace negotiations. Your sense of how that is playing in the general population of Afghanistan, in Afghanistan?
Well, Afghans say that cats do not hunt for rats for the sake of sport, and they are wise enough over the past 4 decades of war to realize that Karzai is also playing a game. The Karzai government is seen by ordinary Afghans as very corrupt, and the politicking over the long-term strategy post-2014 is really an economic and geopolitical agreement in which Karzai himself has asked for a written agreement in the strategic partnership agreement for the U.S. to finance at least $2 billion per year for U.S. forces to stay beyond 2014. So ordinary Afghans are really sick and tired of these games that are being played. Similarly, games that are being played by President Karzai.
Hakim, we're going to thank you very much for being with us, but I wanted to ask you, as we have before when we've had you on, why do you choose not to be identified?
Well, it's strange that Afghan friends that I've met over the past 7-9 years have given me a name out of affection, and the name Hakim means doctor as well as a local doctor as well as a learned person. And I've been trained as a medical physician. It also conveniently fits into my struggle with the Afghan Peace Volunteers in searching for non-military, non-violent solutions here.
Hakim, thank you very much for joining us from Kabul, coordinator of the Afghan Youth Peace Volunteers. We're going to break for just 20 seconds and come back and get the response of longtime journalist Gopal, who is in Afghanistan for years and now has just returned from Syria. Stay with us.